My name is Tom Pankratz. I'm a former director of the IDA and the editor of the Water Desalination Report. The IDA is a technical trade organization with a goal of encouraging research, development, and the appropriate utilization of desalination and water reuse technologies. Today's IDA represents the coming together of two organizations in the 1980s, the International Desalination and Environmental Association and the National Water Supply and Improvement Association. Today we're in San Diego at the IDA's biannual World Congress, where we're going to be interviewing some desal industry veterans. This is part of a program funded by Faith Leitner in honor of her late father, Gordon Leitner, an industry veteran and a mentor to many of us. Gordon was a former IDA president and the founding editor of the organization's Desal and Water Reuse Quarterly. Today, we're going to be talking with two thermal desal veterans. On my immediate left is Sherman May, a longtime Bechtel desalter, and next to Sherman is Leon Awerbuch, who is with Leading Edge Technologies. He's also a longtime IDA director and former IDA president. So with that, Sherman, let's start by give us a little bit of background on your career. How did you get involved in desalting, and what jobs have you held in the industry?
I got started an interest because I had summer jobs, and one of the best summer jobs I ever had was working at a liquid hydrogen plant. We took impure gases from a refinery and purified it into liquid hydrogen, and then used that for rocket testing, etc. Anyway, that got me interested in heat transfer and thermodynamics. And so when I went to college, I started doing studies in that area. And when I got out of college in 1963, I went to work for Rocketdyne, making J-2 rocket engines, and development of those engines for the space program to get to the moon. Again, heat transfer thermodynamics. And I learned some lessons there, one of which was, once we got to the moon, employment peaked at about 20,000, and then it started going down real fast to 3,500 people. At that point, I figured, boy, I better start looking around. But they did transfer me to Atomics International, where we were testing liquid metal heat exchangers. And this heat exchanger was huge. It was maybe 10 feet in diameter, 50 feet tall. It's made by a company called Baldwin Lima Hamilton. And this was all in the Los Angeles area. And I thought, well, I'll find another job. And BLH had been in business for over 120 years, sent them an application, and then went back east because they were in Pennsylvania. And I got an interview and was hired by BLH, and that got me started into desalting. They were one of the big three really in distillation desalting in those days. It was Westinghouse, Aquachem, and BLH. And so I worked for them, and like I said, been in business 120 years. A year and a half later, they got notice they're going out of business. And part of it was sold to MECO, and some part of it was sold to Envirogenics. And so I ended up going to Envirogenics. I ended up working really in the reverse membrane part, but the distillation part was transferred to Dave Case's group, who were doing mostly VTE type stuff, but they needed the expertise that BLH had developed in MSF. And Envirogenics did a lot of work in distillation, like I said, VTE plants. They bid on a 50 million gallon a day plant in Hong Kong. Didn't get it, but they bid on that. And but pretty much my career after that was all in distillation and RO. But like what happened to Envirogenics, I went there, and about 2 years later, I got this call from this guy called Leon Awerbuch, and he offered me a job at Envirogenics, or at Bechtel. I went to Bechtel, and I worked with Leon for 25 years. And since that time, I worked pretty much independent on different projects and with other engineering companies. But most all that time's been with either distillation or some kind of a membrane type work.
Now, when people hear Bechtel, they usually think of Bechtel being a big engineering firm or construction firm. Did they build desal plants? Is that what you were doing for them?
No, it was not construction that they did. They were more project management type things. And we were in a special part of Bechtel, advanced technology. It had several other names, but they were looking at future type projects, and that's why desalting was where we were involved. There was like 3 or 4 of us that were mainly involved in the desalting. Obviously Leon, myself, Al Rogers, and Victor Vandermaas. Victor had a lot of experience in vertical tube technology. He was very interested in that. And Leon was, as Leon will be mentioning, an old-time desalter. And so there was about the 4 of us that were doing the desalting work. And as far as it goes, it was mostly either operating plants or doing project management. One of the big jobs, for example, was in Jebel. Bechtel, that job started in the very early 70s. And that was a project. Bechtel did the overall project management, put the project together. And I got involved in that because early on there was nothing but bare land out there, mostly sand, and there was no infrastructure. So one of our first projects was get water. And so we'd specified a barge-mounted seawater desalting plant. And it was built by the Japanese, and it was boated, brought over.
What capacity was that?
It was about 5 MGD.
So 5 MGD on a barge going back to the early 70s.
Right. It had its own power plant and then an MSF unit. In those days, RO wouldn't even be considered.
Hitachi built it.
Yeah.
Huh.
And it was brought over, grounded, and it was really a very nice design because the intakes was just part of the barge itself. And that plant still exists there. Periodically, last time I was there was in 2000, but periodically it has been started up and used for supplies still.
Wow. And Leon?
First of all, I wanted to thank Faith Leitner to arranging all of that, because that's a really important step for all of us to remember history of desalination. And as we get older, it's really going to disappear. So that recording is extremely important to all of us. So quickly to get you to my story of desalination, it started with my degree in chemical engineering in Warsaw Polytechnic in Poland. I got on a program of solving coal mine waters, which was saline water. In 1962, I started to look for solution how to recover water from highly saline water from Polish coal mines. And that's a problem which exists today. The water discharge from the coal mines was bringing pollution to Vistula River. And so I was in research institute immediately after the graduation and getting master's degree, and got involved in trying to find new solution to concentrate, reuse water, and find mineral recovery from the salt. So that was kind of my first step in '62 in desalting. Then I studied quite a bit of different solutions, and obviously thermal distillation was the way to deal with high salinity brines, and seed slurry technique, which is popular, was one of the first choices. Make a story short, in '67 I arrived in the United States as a tourist, and 1 week later I prepared myself to look for the job. So I called first BLH. In first week I talked to Bob Tidball, which was joint boss of Sherman and Myton, and say, want to discuss with you MSF, multi-stage flash technology. He said, where are you from? So I blabbed from Poland. And he was so fascinated somebody knew his name, he invited me to come to BLH, which was in Chester, Pennsylvania. And half an hour later, he sent me to Al Rogers, which is another friend which we worked for a long time. And they hired me to BLH. So in '67, I started really working on MSF distillation and all the other solutions which BLH is involved. So I really joined Aquachem like in 1970, and then stay with them for quite time. And in '82, I finally moved to Bechtel. So long story, we got a lot of projects all over the world. I was the designer working with famous guy like Mandy Steinbrücker, which we mentioned, Dick Geldner, which you hear probably one of the leading pioneers in the soldering. And Mandy was a phenomenal designer.
Who hired you at Aquachem?
Gordon.
It was Gordon.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I work with the design team, and we know of all the great guys who work for Aquachem and become spread all over the industry. In '82, Aquachem bid Hong Kong job, 48, the largest desalination plant in the world at the time, 48 MSF plant, and lost to Sasakura, which, by the way, they licensed on several technology, including vapor compression. At that point, also, Aquachem was bought by Coca-Cola, and I made the decision where I got a project sitting in southern Italy, in Brindisi, looking at MED plant, one of the first MED plants, horizontal parallel feeding. Then I got a call from Al Rogers from Bechtel. Would you want to come to Bechtel? I said, no, I enjoy Italy. So when I finish the Italian job, I will come to San Francisco. Anyway, make a story short, Bechtel offered me the job. I went up in Freeport, Texas, doing in Dow Chemical Complex, doing advanced MED, MSF combination as a development engineer. And 1 year later, I told them I don't want to stay in Texas. They moved me to San Francisco in '73. So then the history almost catches up. I hired to our group both Sherman in '74 and Victor van der Maas, and that became core of the team, which done a lot of work in design on thermal, on hybrids, and distillation plants. It was engineering rather than construction. So Bechtel really didn't do the major construction until later of desalination of power plants. Power plants, they always done. It started with famous Bullseye Island. Somebody else mentioned that before. Bechtel did the design for Bullseye Island. That goes back to '65. So in Bechtel, we done a lot of work in a group which started called Scientific Development in Bechtel, and then called, Sherman, as you recall, Research and Development.
Yeah.
And so we were part of the team until finally the group, as I said, convinced them that the salting and really needs to have its own home, and we wind up in basically as a group of Bechtel Power. Ultimately, after Bechtel Civil, we wind up in Bechtel Power, and I wind up myself in Bechtel Power Group running the desalination program in Middle East. And focus was because Middle East was the place where desalting was happening all the time. We really done a lot of work in desalination. And as you mentioned, Bechtel is well known for, at those days, to do all kinds of projects in the Middle East.
Sherman, I'd like to come back to you and talk about your involvement with SWIC, or the Saline Water Conversion Corporation in Saudi. I understand at Bechtel, one of the things you did is get involved in a study for SWIC.
Yeah, in the early days for SWIC, when they really started to build up big, one of the studies they solicited proposals on was building very large desalting plants, because MSF had all been relatively small plants, and if you're going to build really big plants, what can you do?
When you said the early days, let's put this in perspective. What year are we talking about here?
Well, this was the mid-'70s.
Okay.
And so they put out specifications of, hey, these are the type of operating conditions we're looking at, the water quality, et cetera. And what's your ideas on making a good plant? So Bechtel put together a study involving several different companies, included Westinghouse. Bruce Watson did stuff on looking at the scaling potential. Hitachi was also involved, but Bechtel did the overall management. And we looked, and another company was T.Y. Lin International. They do stressed concrete, and that was one of the things looked at is how to minimize material costs. And so we looked at many different things. It ended up with something that involved a two-stage plant, or not two stages, but a two-level plant, and many stages. It involved once-through operation and some high-temperature scaling additives, and a long tube was also considered in it. And like I said, the materials of construction, we looked at using concrete for doing the vessel construction.
Let me add something to that story. That was basically idea of building 60 million gallons desalination plant. And the optimum which Bechtel proposed, which is so funny, was that you cannot build 60 million gallons in one vessel, but the optimum is 20 MGD. Now, you know the history. Today, 20 MGD is the largest MSF plant. That was done in 70s, end of 70s. And really today we came back to, really we are at 20 MIGD units. So that was kind of very interesting study. We've done quite a bit of design studies for different conceptual faults for SWIC, and together, by the way, you should know that between Aquachem and Bechtel, we designed a big study for vertical MED between and partnership of Aquachem and Bechtel for OSW of vertical 50 million gallons per day. That was competition, and one of the team was really Bechtel Aquachem. So we had like a crossbreed relation with different engineering company, and obviously we per se as a Bechtel didn't manufacture anything, but basically engineering constructed.
Well, what's interesting is that when I was at BLH, Leon wasn't there at the time, we were also looking at vertical tube type evaporators.
Well, didn't they do a vertical tube unit here in California, a big unit?
No, that's much later. That's IDE picked it up, vertical tube aluminum with vertical tower,
But
and
much
that
later.
you know.
But BLH did the work with catalytic engineers. I remember that.
So there were team ups.
Yeah.
You know, there was a competition of different teams working to come out with the most advanced thermal desalination plants, and almost everybody agreed, because that was kind of focus on California to make it vertical, to minimize land use and so on, and obviously give some advantages of really advanced technology, which at that time was MED, similar to what's happening today on thermal side.
Well, speaking of MED, I want to go back to you, Leon, and ask a question about your involvement with, I guess it was for OSW, where you went on a technology transfer mission to Israel. Tell us a little bit about that. And I ask the question because depending upon who you talk to, you hear different versions of what transpired when that happened. From one group, I hear that you went over there as a spy for the U.S., and from some people over here, we hear that you came over, or you went over there as a spy for Israel. I realize that those are inflammatory comments, but
So the
describe
story is, it happens like, I went to Israel on private basis because my parents came from Poland to Israel. So I arrived in 1917 in Israel, and of course I knew IDE at that time. So I walked into IDE, I called them and said, you know, I want to have discussion. I am from Aquachem. So, you know, they said, what, you come to spy on us? You know, I said, no, I wanted to exchange views on MED technology. And so I came back, obviously, to Aquachem and told them the news. This is 1970, so, and nothing really happened. We never worked together. They went on their own way. IDE developed the aluminum 5052 alloy MED technology with their unique solution, and Aquachem built their own MED plants.
So you never actually...
No, there is a phase 2 to it.
Okay.
So phase 2 in 76, I was hired by Office of Saline Water, or OWRT at that time. So 76, right, 73.
And what did OWRT?
No, OWRT was then.
What was that an acronym for?
Office of Water Research and Technology. That was successor to OSW. in 73, and I didn't tell you, maybe I mentioned that I was in Texas Development, right? That was OSW. In 73, Nixon administration killed OSW. So they said no more funding for desalting after years of, so that converted after a few years to Office of Water Research and Technology. And they were looking for a joint project, United States, Israel, on advanced MED. And that was part of discussion, early discussion of peace process. So they were looking for project manager, US manager. So I was hired by State Department on behalf of State Department and OWRT and went to Israel. And I lived there for 3 years. And we were project manager or technical manager for US side of that. So I knew everything on the design of IDEs. I learned quite a bit, obviously, at that time. So I spent 3 years in Israel managing that program. And we work obviously very closely with IDE. And at that time, when I came, that was unique. I got a leave of absence from Bechtel, which first time in the history of Bechtel somebody got for 3 years leave of absence. And I came back in 79 to Bechtel and rejoined with the rest of the team until probably 86, which I went to Washington and they were still in San Francisco. And so the story of MED, I obviously didn't have anybody to sell anything, but I learned both the IDE technology pretty well on MED and obviously Aquachem because I was part of the development team in Aquachem of the MED technology. So in reality, they give me a good background of two advanced MED technologies solution.
Sherman, I'd like to turn back to you and ask a little bit about geothermal desalting. I understand that that was an area that you've been involved in.
Yes, through Bechtel. Through Bechtel, I did some geothermal desalting work. The Bureau of Reclamation had a facility here in Imperial Valley in California that had a lot of geothermal resources. One of the concepts was desalt this geothermal brine, use it to solve some of the problems around here of lack of water, and use desalting technologies to get the brine purified. And so Bechtel operated a test facility, like you said, in the Imperial Valley. And we had 3 different technologies we were testing. Multi-stage flash, vertical tube evaporators, and also high temperature electrodialysis. And we tested all 3 of those units. The brine was generally 8 to 10,000 ppm, but we were able to purify it, down to good enough water quality for even agriculture or drinking uses, and did that in the late 70s. I'm not sure they ended up going forward with that project, but there certainly is some serious problems here. Salton Sea has not been solved yet, and that would have been one of the sources of water for the Salton Sea.
Well, in fact, I understand that Dieter Emmerman, a guy who just passed away just a couple of months ago, was still active and still doing stuff related to the Salton Sea.
Well, there is, sorry, jump in.
Yeah.
The geothermal energy is now obviously very much on minds of a lot of people because it's one of the renewable resources without using fossil fuel. And so geothermal desalting is now part of the program. Masdar is trying to solve geothermal desalting using, but the concept which was done in 72, we started that program in 72 in Bechtel, working with Bureau of Reclamation, resulted not ultimately after testing, they really decided not to build because it was idea of build like something like 30 million gallons per day for Imperial Valley. And obviously the funding was there, so the whole slowly died. Now it's reviving. So there's that experience which we spent a lot of time in those days could be very valuable today because it involved corrosion, scale, concentration of heavy brine, and so on. So I remember that we put together a paper in one of the earliest conferences we ever had. It's in Ponce, Puerto Rico in 1975, which is really not IDA. That was sponsored at that time by IDEA, and that was one of the first events, and one of the papers which I wrote together with Victor and Sherman was geothermal desalting, and this is long history, but all involve thermal processes to really concentrate and recover the brine using the energy of geothermal resources. Quite interesting.
There was a lot of interesting things that came out of that, especially scaling issues. Other issues, as Leon was mentioning, was material technology. There's a lot of H2S ended up being in some of those brines, and some of the tubes we had were not compatible with the H2S at all. So there was a lot of technology we learned out of that. There's a couple reports still in existence on that hopefully somebody can resurrect.
Well, we've also done quite a bit of work on geothermal energy with Electric Power Research Institute, the EPRI, and many of our patents which we put together really deal with use of geothermal energy, flashing process, recovering of carbon dioxide, how to control scales, silica scale and other, which is critical in high recovery issues. So it was really quite interesting. And so the geothermal aspect was really one of our main activities for a while.
Does it have a future?
Oh, I am sure it does. Geothermal energy is a big player in the world. I am sure. The challenges, the new research are kind of deviating with very hot rock concept, which is a little bit advanced. But whenever you have geothermal resource, there is really, and need water, that's a straightforward proposition.
A couple of the other pioneers that we talked about mentioned two projects that were, game changers or important projects to the industry, Key West and Point Loma. Were either of you involved in those projects? Or is there any comments about those projects?
No, the Key West was a famous project because it was 2.62 Westinghouse built, included titanium, very long tubes, over 100 feet long tubes, long tube design. At that time was the largest MSF plant in the world. Soon after came Aquachem plant in Rosarita, 3.75 MGD plants, 2 units. And then Aquachem was
and that's Rosarita, Mexico.
Rosarita, Mexico. It's coming again in different form, but So it was built and demonstrated and really found. We were in Point Loma in San Diego. Aquachem did the most advanced MSF plant, MEMS project, multi-effect distillation system, which is combination of multi-effect, is still MSF, but had something of performance ratio of 21, and it tried to reach top brine temperature of 330 degrees Fahrenheit. And everything was looked in Clarengo, that was the plant, and the plant was built, and at the startup, the brine heater blew up because titanium tubes, which were used in brine heater to prevent corrosion, had hydrogen penetration. I make it too technical, but that killed the MEMS projects, which was clearly the most advanced distillation from point of performance ratio. And Point Loma, as you said, was the plant which was moved to Guantanamo. And I don't think that Bechtel had anything to do with that. I forgot who was the designer and builder of that. But that was
that
MSF plant. Benson Rowe done Universal Desire. And their history is that they were the first kind of consulting engineer on larger scale to provide MSF Universal Design, which was used in Saudi Arabia. So first Jeddah MSF plant, which was 2 units, 2.5 MGD, was based on Universal Design. But maybe you are right. The Point Loma was Benson Rowe because then they got contract to run that plant for forever. So in Guantanamo.
That's what I thought, but I'm not positive.
Yeah. You bring up a good point. We're here in San Diego, Point Loma is here.
Yeah.
And as Leon said, that plant was very influential when Cuba was taken over. The plant was dismantled and sent to Cuba because what Cuba tried to do was cut off the water supply to our military base down there. And that plant was used to supply the water. The other thing is there was an OSW test facility here in San Diego. Right. And the Clarengo plant that he mentioned was down at south part of San Diego here. And so San Diego played a big part in desalting.
It has. And a lot of people, especially with the current drought and looking at desal now, have no idea of the long history it has, and the fact that that history is thermal.
Right.
Yeah. And just to add, in here in Clarengo, there was also famous horizontal tube demonstration plant, which was called HTEX, and was a large-scale demonstration of the plant, which lasted and collected maybe 1,000 hours of data, and then was shut down for lack of additional funding.
Now, you mentioned Guantanamo Bay, and this is another story. As an Aquachem alum, I heard stories about the old days, and one of them had to do with Guantanamo Bay when they were going to purchase another thermal unit, and Aquachem was awarded the contract,
An idea got
but
it.
but then it was taken back because there was a Buy America clause. Can you tell us?
I don't know exactly, but ultimately IDE got the plant.
That's not exactly Buy America, right?
Yeah, that was Buy America.
Well,
it was competition, really.
The story I had heard is that they had a senator, an influential senator, add one little line into a bill that said that just because it's a government installation doesn't mean it has to be Buy America if it's a better price, or something to that effect.
No,
Is
in
that true?
reality, on competitive prices, IDE technology was really cheaper, because they use aluminum alloy tubes rather than copper nickel, and so on competitive basis. But I think IDE ultimately got the second plant, and then obviously switched all to RO, and the distillation disappeared.
Yeah. No, but that was, again, you hear these rumors within the industry, and sometimes it's hard to find what the actual the real
if you
story
look
was.
to a story about competition, we talk about in Biogenics story. They built famous plant in St. Thomas and St. Croix, vertical tube MED with advanced
You rolled your
double-fluted.
eyes.
Yeah, I've been there so many times. Double-fluted tubes, except the nozzle, which was on top of the MED, never really pop out and plug up the whole tube. So instead of in Biogenic, who projected on pilot plants data, very, very high heat transfer performance, the plant produced less than 50% of the design capacity. And then that was beginning of, by the way, of predecessor of IDA, the National Water Supply Improvement Association. The Grimshaw was the director general or managing director of VIWOPA at that time. And he was looking for solution. And that's how, and I was just coming from visit to Israel, you kind of break, and he used to ask me, what do you recommend for MED technology? I said, I just saw MED technology in IDE. And he bought the IDE plants first, which allows IDE to really force their way into Virgin Island and built for 30-something years. Right, the whole Caribbean was their MED technology. So ask Danny Hoffman. He knows
we'll be
story.
asking him that question. But let me switch back to you. You tell me, you look like you had a story there.
Well, when I was at Envirogenics, I really wasn't working with the distillation and the VTE technology. But we're a very close group in a small company, so I knew what was going on. And boy, there was issues in trying to even get it built. And they had one, as an example of a crazy problem, they had a huge delay. There was no welding rod down there. They couldn't find it. It had been shipped. Somebody had stole the rod, thrown it on top of a trailer someplace, which was going to pick it up later. But it delayed the project. They had so many, issues. It was unbelievable. The guy, Dave Kays, was the gentleman that was in charge of that section. And as Leon pointed out, some of the plants didn't exactly work out. In fact, they sold one plant to the parent company, Aerojet, and that one didn't work out so well either, which causes problem when the parent company isn't happy. So,
well, Leon, you started to mention a little bit about the IDA history, and we're at the IDA World Congress in San Diego. The last Congress in the U.S. was right here in 1999. But I think it would be appropriate to reflect a little bit on the birth of the IDA. I mentioned earlier that it really was the amalgamation of the IDEA and NWISA. Tell us a little bit about that,
Yeah.
and also if you would talk a little bit about just the future of the IDA and its affiliates and just the organization. And also, it might be good to touch on Gordon Leitner's involvement in some of those early years, too.
I will be glad. So let's start with predecessor of IDA. The National Water Supply Improvement Association was born really in 1973. And then I happened to be elected, you mentioned that, to the board of directors in 1975. So I wasn't on the first beginning. Going forward, there were obviously Bob Backish had the organization Parallel started, which was first Caribbean Desalting Association, then turned into IDEA, International Desalination and Environmental Association. And NWSIA and IDEA will kind of run parallel, having every year parallel conferences, and we NWSIA and both claim international, membership. So on two boards, and I happen to be on board of IDEA and NWSIA, group of us decided that doesn't make sense to have two associations running in parallel and doing basically the same thing every year. So we started a process of merging the two groups, and took quite a bit of work. And really, Gordon Leitner was on director at one point, together with Ian Watson. Ian Watson and I got elected at the same time in 1975.
Who was the first president of the IDA?
The first, hold on, so let me get to the merger.
Okay.
So merger happened officially in Orlando in 1974. We prepared a constitution, which took us 2 years to finish constitution of IDA. Chris Burroughs from CH2M Hill and I were designated the authors of the constitution, which had to be approved by the board's board. The battles, can you imagine the battles? Every word of the constitution was challenged by one or the other group. And anyway, in 84 was the official agreement to merger. In 85, we went to Bermuda. It was the first conference of IDA. And there was third party, working party from European Working Party on Desalination, which was run by Professor De Leanis. So the two groups merged in 85 first conference, and Floyd Miller, who was at the time president of NWSIA, and Sam Jamjoom were interim president until election in 85. And Jim Birkett became the first president of the new merged association.
Jamjoom was from Saudi Arabia.
So Jamjoom was vice governor of Saline Water Conversion Corporation, and he was president of IDEA. Mm-hmm. And Floyd Miller was the president of NWSIA, or WSIA, because there was some change in between to Water Supply Improvement Association rather than National Water Supply. When the two organizations merged, the first affiliate, which was born out of the merger, was NWSIA again, and then switched to American Desalination Association, now become EMTA. So in 85 really is the first new president of the born organization, which Jim Birkett became. So to kind of make sure.
And Ian Watson went on to become the...
Ian Watson became president of American Desalination Association. I remember because I was still on the board of that. And we went to Austin, Texas, and he got elected to be. But that was probably a little bit later because he was for quite, I would say we are talking beginning of 90s where that happened.
And now, well, and he
he would
led
be in
AMTA, and they are now an IDA affiliate.
As long as you're talking about old organizations, I don't know if you've mentioned much about Office of Saline Water, but they were the huge contributor to advancing desalting. when I worked at BLH, we did a study on a vertical tube type evaporators that was funded by OSW. They put together, I don't know, hundreds of what we are termed greenbacks, small reports on things.
It's over thousands of them.
Over 1,000. And they got tremendous technical detail on many subjects that are still relevant today. I remember out of the Clare Engel plant, they had some information on deaerators, and they went into minutia to figure out why it wasn't doing exactly what it was doing, and that information would be even useful today. And like Leon said, over 1,000 reports on everything from in distillation and other type technologies as well.
And in fact, I think Kevin Price has done some work at the Bureau of Reclamation in his semi-retirement or leading up to it, where he's tried to put all that stuff in, get it in digital format. He's gone on and found even more stuff. So there's even more extensive information that he's digitized and I guess trying to make it in a user-friendly format. Now, speaking of the OSW, isn't the IDA scholarship named after one?
Yeah, Chana Pasapa.
Why don't you talk about him a little? We haven't heard his name yet. Tell us about.
He was reverse osmosis technology, but he was
still instrumental in the organization.
He was more the desalting person, or reverse osmosis desalting person in OSW, and unfortunately, he died at a very early age, actually. And that's why the award was named after him in his honor.
Yeah, so the story was he was really the dynamic force behind the RO in OSW, and he was director of the Department for Membrane in OSW. So when he died, and that was just about the period of merger in 86, we decided to establish scholarship. It was part of the negotiation of merger to establish scholarship in his name. And since those days, we still awarded something like 56 PhD scholarship, and we probably put into it about over $250,000 in all the scholarship from beginning of that effort. So OSW clearly was very instrumental, as Sherman said, in pushing the envelope of desalination. The reports are invaluable. Not many people really have access to that, and I'm happy that Kevin Price is really trying to do something more to make it user-friendly.
One other old-timer in that respect is Oak Ridge National Labs.
Right.
They did a lot of work in distillation-type technology, and
all the programs, MSF, MED program, RSF, and so on, which is famous, they develop very detailed program for design and both design and optimization of thermal distillation plants, and was a valuable group in Oak Ridge National Lab. You are right, Sherman. That was, with the government during Nixon administration, basically disbanding the financial support, all the research institution kind of fizzle out in the salting. And then the industry started to pick up on their own, so a lot of work was done basically by the companies who are in this business.
Well, as we're getting towards the end of this session, I'd like to ask you both to reflect a little bit on your career in general. Is there anybody that we haven't mentioned that you think deserves a little recognition? Anybody who is of particular importance? And also, just since we've focused on the thermal industry, in fact, I just saw a GWI report that shows the pretty dismal state of the thermal industry as compared to just a few years ago, with virtually no MSFs even awarded in the past year. But what do you foresee as the future of the thermal industry? Just kind of closing comments for each of you, starting with you, Sherman.
Well, one thing you bring up is that topic is I remember in the 80s when there were tremendous number of reports comparing RO to MSF and which is the better technology, and whoever you listened to had the best idea. So obviously it's still going on to some extent, but what's really happened is MSF has been supplanted by MED type processes, and they're doing well. I don't know, you publish the information, but how it's
Well, yeah,
doing.
there's still plants, and they tend to be smaller, and there's fewer of them. But from what we've seen, you're certainly right.
I would say that if you look at thermotechnology, clearly MED is the only major competitor now to membrane or RO technology today. And they don't disappear. Even MSF is not going to disappear because there's a tremendous momentum in Middle East. You said, but just awarded in Qatar, large MSF plant. And so basically Mitsubishi got with Hitachi building huge MSF plant of basically 90 million gallons. And they got not long ago another in Abu Fonta. So the MSF plants are still, or distillation plants, all over the map, focusing in Middle East, maybe China. They obviously, technology has other application for solar energy, renewable energy. When you talk about thermal processes, the only logical coupling with thermal processes and renewable energy is MED. Now, membrane with photovoltaic is straightforward, but if you want to have full-time desalination plants, then thermal MED, solar thermal, will be a solution for future. So I really don't think the thermal will disappear. And in heavy fracking industry, the distillation has to be because it's really trying to concentrate and recover. So I would say from my perspective is both membrane will be developing further. We will see tremendous progress in MED, very high performance ratio exceeding 16, very near future. We have now plants with over 11 performance ratio, and we'll see really more and more of the advanced hybrid concept really happening in the world. So I really see the parallel development, and it clearly is that membrane technology is really overcoming in capacity and number of units. But still, if you look at Alger, the largest desalination plant, is MSF. And they will compete as long as they can compete with new solutions and ideas, and there's continuously evolvement, they will be still around.
I add something to what I say. We work for engineering companies, and we take the position of, what's the best for an application. There's not a definite answer in most all cases. Recently I did a study, and they had selected RO, and in retrospect, a distillation process would have been better based on the conditions that existed at that location. So, as Leon said, there's still a future for both technologies.
Yeah. Well, I don't disagree with you, by the way. As a guy who has been involved in both, I recognize that there's certainly a role, and especially as you say in the industrial and brine applications. But MED, there are certainly a place for it. So any other veteran desalters or pioneers that we should acknowledge here?
Well, I think some in the VTE technology. There's Ferris Standiford, and did some work, a lot of work in VTE. BLH used his expertise in one of the studies that we did for OSW.
Ferris Standiford developed the first Freeport, Texas MED technology plant. That's before anybody else. Then out of that evolved more advanced technique. But he done quite a bit of pioneering work. He was individual, very smart guy, so one of these guys here. But we mentioned famous people like Mandy Steinbruch, from Aquapeg, which all worked for Gordon Leitner, the Geldner, you heard that I'm sure before. There were a lot of pioneers in thermal desalination. Bob Tidball was one of the big guys. Obviously, IDE on their own side, Nathan Berkman and Danny Hoffman, which you'll be interviewing later. All of these guys, Amnon Tzfati, I can mention a lot of names. They all contributed to development.
And even through all of these names we've mentioned, we haven't mentioned the Silvers or the Temperleys or Jim Stewart
Silver
or
was
Bill
recognized.
Carnes.
Yeah,
there's a whole nother group of people that we haven't even had a chance in the short time we have to
Jim
talk
Stewart,
about.
which we all work,
Yeah.
and so it's impossible to name them all. If you have to really take off track. But Professor Silver, which was clearly a pioneer of MSF technology, one of that, and although he argued with Gordon Leitner quite a bit, who was really the inventor of MSF between basically the different groups in Scotland, which Professor Silver was. But Silver, and we recognized Professor Silver in IDA in one of our conferences in Orlando. So we had that. We never mentioned, for example, people like Professor Deleanis from Greece. I am sure Miriam will bring it up on her occasion, but they were tremendous contributors to development of desalination. Now you ask about future. I hope that the IDA will overcome all the hesitancy which is today and really partially done by the election process which we have, and we can really contribute farther and longer to really make this desalination, which we all believe is a hope for future generation.
Good. Well, good. I'd like to thank you both for taking the time to come here, and it's been fascinating to talk about the history of it, and congratulate you on both for playing a role in that history.